Okay, great. I think that's more or less everyone just hopped onto the call. So we'll let people in as they join from now on. But good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where everyone is today. Here at Topsort, we're super happy to welcome you all to this session on all things sponsored listing, from the successes to the implementation and also to the hesitations. It's so great to see a couple of familiar faces in the call. Really a big welcome. So my name is Molly and I'm going to be the host today. I'm working at Topsort with a lot of our partners to make auction-based advertising super simple, especially in the form of sponsored listings. But luckily for you, it's not just me who will be speaking today. I'm joined here by three true industry experts, Michael, Gastón, and Ben. So I think it's probably best if I let you guys introduce yourself before we begin. Michael, do you want to go first, followed by Gastón?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Ostrovsky, and I'm a chief scientist at Topsort and a professor at Stanford, and I've been working on sponsored listings for a long time. Great to see you here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Gastón Lillier. I'm a senior software engineering manager for Indeed, and I work in the ad tech space, especially on the bidding and optimization space. So yeah, very excited to be here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ben Taggart. I'm a product manager at Thumbtack, where one of the things I work on is monetization and this type of stuff, which I'll get into. And then previously, I was at Google working on mobile app ads.
Okay, great. Thank you guys so much. You can see a real mix across different industries, backgrounds, and I'm sure we'll see different skill sets. So today, the basic plan of how we're going to roll it out is that all of our panel members will tell you their thoughts, journeys, and successes with sponsored listings. And at the end, we can open the floor up to a Q&A. So if you have any questions, keep them in mind, put them in the chat. Feel free to put your microphone on at the end, no worries. So if everyone here is ready to begin, I'll hand over to our first speaker, Topsort Chief Scientist, Michael.
All right, thanks, Molly. Let me share the screen. This is the one I need to share. Okay, now I need to get your faces back. All right. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, all good.
Perfect. All right, let's get started. So what I would like to do to kick things off is just to give a very high-level overview of sponsored listings, talk a bit about the past, present, and some conjectures about the future, and to highlight just how wide the potential applicability of sponsored listings is. And then, the next two speakers will dive into some of the more nitty-gritty details. So let's jump in. So the first online advertisements showed up in 1994 and looked like this. This was an ad by AT&T posted on hotwire.com. And we all recognize this as the intrusive, annoying type of ads that we, learn to know and hate, known as display ads, that are sort of similar in style to newspaper ads, TV ads, billboard ads, etc., that are not directly relevant to the user's current activity, request, search. They're, disruptive, they distort your flow. And, that was the very first type of ads that showed up. Fortunately for everyone, just a few years later, in 1997, this startup called GoTo, that was subsequently renamed into Overture and eventually purchased by Yahoo, came up with this brilliant idea that instead of showing to people stuff that they don't want and they don't need and they're not interested in right now, when people are searching for something, why don't we just show them listings for the things they're searching for? And this is a screenshot of what it looked like back in 1997. Now, the idea is actually not new. If you think about Yellow Pages, they've been doing that for many, many years, right? You open a page with plumbers and you do get ads, but those ads are for plumbers, right? And if you really want to attract more customers, you buy a more prominent ad, you get, more eyeballs, more people notice you. If you're less interested in promoting yourself, you don't, and then you're just listed as a, string of characters with a phone number. Another precursor to sponsored listings is, it can be found in supermarkets, where if you go to a supermarket and you see this row of, Kellogg cereal, Well, the reason why you have so many of them in such a prominent place is that quite likely Kellogg's is paying the supermarket something to display their product in this prominent place. Similarly with the end caps, those parts at the end of the aisles that are particularly noticeable, those are also for sale. And again, they're not irrelevant. They are directly related to what you're looking for. It's just that the providers, the sellers, want to be more noticeable to the potential customers and are willing to pay for that. Now, how did the go-to system work? Just a very brief overview, right? So one of the key ideas was that the advertisers bid on specific keywords. They specify what, when their ads should be shown. Ad bids would remain in the system, but can be changed at any time, right? So this is automated, unlike a lot of display ads at the time. You didn't have to pick up the phone and call someone. You could just do it completely automatically. And then when a user searches for a particular term, he or she would see the ads next to the organic results. Now, the original auction design was called generalized first price auction. And the logic was very simple. Ads were shown in the descending order of the bids. So the more you're willing to pay, the higher up it will show you. And when someone clicks on your ad, that's how much go-to would charge the user. So that was the original design that worked reasonably well, but had some issues. And these issues were addressed by Google when they introduced their own system in 2002 in what is known as the generalized second price auction. They made two important changes. So the first change was that instead of ranking ads purely based on bids, they would rank them by the product of a bid times the clickability of an ad. So if an ad was more likely to get clicked, it would also be shown higher, right? The idea is we shouldn't show an ad if it's not very relevant, if there is a substantially more relevant one available for a similar bid. The second change was that instead of paying your own bid, advertisers would pay the bid of the next highest bidder, which had nicer incentive properties, prevented some cycling behavior, led to a more stable system, also higher revenues. And that is now the most common format, although I'm going to talk a bit towards the end about potential future development. And it sort of took the world by storm. Initially, even Google wasn't that sure that it was going to work particularly well. Like they didn't know. And they reserved the most valuable real estate at the top of the page for what they call Google Premium sponsorships, where they would negotiate with premium advertisers, large deals for the right to be shown at the top of the page. And then on the right, kind of this leftover space, is where they would try this AdWords auction. And it only a few months, they realized that this leftover right-hand stuff is just completely overtaking the top. And so, in 2002, in 2003, they sent a message to premium advertisers saying, look, we're changing our mind. This whole premium stuff is going to become part of AdWords. And they started selling their whole page using just this automated auction system, right? They would still provide a lot of help and support to bigger advertisers, but they would no longer just give them premium space through human transactions. This became adopted by search engines worldwide. And this theme that these types of systems often substantially outperform initial expectations kind of recurred over and over again. I have a collection of quotes. If anyone is interested, send me an email from various places where they expect a certain amount of money to be made from these types of auctions, and then 3 years later they're making 4 times as much. So what are some of those other spaces? Once search engines started printing money using these sponsored listings, others took notice. And the first space that really took it seriously, the first area, is e-commerce. And specifically, Amazon started experimenting with advertising in 2003. So it actually took them a while. Now, they tried a whole bunch of different things. It's not like they just took this and immediately started making a lot of money. Things that often look very straightforward in hindsight took a long time to perfect. So in particular, this idea of sponsored listings, of promoting things that are already shown in the organic search, was not something that Amazon tried right away. But once they finally converged to this idea, their business took off. So, at the bottom, you see this graph, this exponential growth of their revenues from advertising over the past 8 years. And they just last week finally officially revealed their ad revenues, and they made more than $30 billion last year, which made them the third largest ad business in the US. Now, there are many others doing the same thing in the e-commerce space. Alibaba is, their primary source of revenue is sponsored listings. Walmart noticed that Amazon is making this, had to join the party. Same thing with Wayfair, Target, Kroger, Albertsons. So a lot of retailers there's now even a term called retail media, where they realize that this is a very powerful monetization technology. And it's not just the old school retailers, the kind of new generation of retailers, players like Instacart, Uber Eats, just a few months ago, DoorDash, are all joining the party because they're realizing just how powerful this technology is. Now, I want to pause for a second and make one sort of strategic observation. And the observation is the following. So suppose you have, this sponsored listings platform. Well, it gives you a greater flexibility in price setting and in how much you charge in terms of commissions, because you have this extra revenue source that you can use to offset losses somewhere else. And so if you have a retailer or player marketplace A that has a successful sponsored listings platform and retailer B does not, well, then retailer A can undercut retailer B's prices, commissions, and everything else. And basically, the choices of platform B quite often are either to also introduce sponsored listings platform to get the same type of revenue, or kind of slowly disappear, which means that once a few players in a particular industry start using sponsored listings, it kind of has to spread to everyone or almost everyone in that industry. All right. So applicability, right? I talked about sponsored search, right? And that's sort of the precursor of that is Yellow Pages. Sponsored products in e-commerce, you can think of that as a digital version of end caps and slotting fees, but that's just scratching the surface. The idea of sponsored listings is actually applicable to pretty much any website or app with a search box or search through categories or through any kind of taxonomy or navigation or any type of order list, right? Whenever people are looking for something, and that something is a long list of results, and those results want to be shown higher, you have a potential wonderful opportunity to deploy sponsored listings. And let me just show you some examples from all kinds of different areas. First one, app stores. If you go to Apple App Store or Google Play Store and look for to-do list or some other type of app, at the top and in some other slots, you're going to get promoted results. This is pretty new, this in the last 5 years. Job search sites. We're going to hear from Gastón from Indeed, where if you're looking for a job and you type in software engineer in San Mateo, at the top you're going to get firms that pay to promote their listings. On the other side, you have services: Fiverr, Thumbtack, Yelp Ad. We're going to hear about Thumbtack. Travel, right? You search for Expedia, you get promoted listings, and it keeps going on and on and on in a lot of different areas. Again, anything with a search box is a potential area for deployment. So what makes sponsored listings so successful? And the main reason is that ads for items that the user is actively looking for the ads are for the items that the user is actively looking for. So they're very relevant, and it's great for everyone involved. It's great for the marketplace. It's great for the vendors, and it's great for the end customers. And I'm actually going to skip the slides for the benefits, because where I want to get is what do we think is going to happen in the future? What does the future hold for sponsored listings? And there are several things that are going to be important. The first one is privacy considerations, right? If you're reading the news about ad tech or about advertising in general, you keep hearing about the death of third-party cookies, about people not willing to share their data, et cetera, et cetera. That is fantastic news for sponsored listings, because the whole premise behind sponsored listings is that we don't necessarily need this information. It's helpful when you have it, but when someone tells you that they're looking for a water bottle guess what? That's more than enough information to show them relevant results and relevant ads. You don't need to know their age, gender, etc. And to confirm this, these are two headlines from last week. I just put them side by side. February 2nd, Facebook stock plummets 26%. The company blamed privacy changes to Apple's iOS, right? Apple made a bunch of privacy changes on how information can be shared, slowly killing Facebook. And at the same week, Amazon stock soars 15%. They revealed their advertising business as $31.2 billion in 2021, as I already mentioned. What's the difference? Well, Amazon knows what I'm searching for. I tell them what I'm searching for, so they're not affected by these privacy issues. So the budgets may shift quite dramatically. Another potentially interesting change going forward is the changes in auction format. So in particular, increased adoption of auto bidding, right? I mentioned the generalized second price auction, and that's kind of the de facto standard, but you can put a lot of other bells and whistles around it. And in particular, building intelligent systems that make it really easy for advertisers, especially smaller ones, to advertise is kind of really fruitful way for the future, right? Giving a way to, not making sure that advertisers can be successful without hiring an army of data scientists. Another thing about the auction format is, maybe there are some alternatives to GSP that we should try. So for example, the Russian search engine Yandex is using another auction format called Vickrey-Clark Groves. More generally, right now we kind of treat organic results and sponsored results as separate, but in many cases, they're both ads, right? If you think about Amazon, it's all kind of ads. So maybe there is something to be done about the interaction of the two. Another interesting future development is ad listing format. If you look at Yellow Pages, they have all kinds of different formats. It's not just reordering the items. Well, the same will be happening in sponsored listings. Already on Google, some ads take a lot more space than others. And you can imagine having color, adding images. So there is kind of wide space for creativity of how to do that without being annoying. Yeah, what makes it easier not to be annoying is that people are actually looking for this stuff. In the same vein, another future development is video ads, right? If you search for Bluetooth speaker on Amazon, one of the ads is going to be a video. Again, it's not annoying because you're looking for Bluetooth speakers, and this particular ad is showing you this wonderful speaker from all the different angles. Going forward, I expect pretty soon we're going to start seeing interactive ads where it's not just passive video, but you can actually play with the ad. Obviously, it requires a lot of development. And again, this is not annoying like pop-up windows. It's useful because you're searching for this kind of stuff. So I'm over time, so let me conclude. Sponsored listings are a really powerful tool, profitable, relevant to users, not irritating or distracting, gives voice to the vendors. Origins go to times well before the internet, took off on search engines, spread to e-commerce and beyond, now exploding in more and more domains. Not clear where the limit is. Anything with a search box or categories is a potential area of application, and lots of exciting developments going forward. Thank you.
Great, Michael. Thank you so much. I mean, I think it's crazy for us to see the journey of sponsored listings and how it's come to be such a powerful monetization tool. And I guess with digitalization and the growth of e-commerce, like who knows how big it could be one day.
Yep.
So yeah, great. I mean, if anyone has any questions, keep hold of it for now, as I said before. And at the end, we'll open the floor to a Q&A or put it in the chat as you guys like. So now that I guess we've had this high level introduction to sponsored listings, our next speaker, Gastón, is going to take a more zoomed in approach. So I will hand the mic over to Gastón, the Senior Software Engineering Manager at Indeed. Take it away.
All right, thanks, Molly. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about marketplace optimization as a whole. And I have maybe too many slides, so I may go too fast. If I go too fast, you can like raise a hand or something and tell me that I should slow, but I'll just get started. So, well, a little bit about me. I'm, as you know, I'm a manager basically at Indeed. My team is called the Marketplace Optimization Team, where we have basically the task of optimizing the marketplace, as the name suggests. From the ad tech perspective, we need to work on the bidding systems and optimizing that side of the, let's say, the equation. And also we need to optimize the user experience, the employer experience at Indeed, where they come to Indeed and they want to sponsor a job. And we need to define the pricing for them and all of that. So I'm going to deep dive today more about the bidding side of things, and let's say how we make the listing actually work, the ranking actually work. So I just get started. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about ranking and monetization as a whole problem. I'm going to touch a little bit of topics that Michael already talked about, like second price auctions and stuff like that. But then I'm going to talk a little bit about marketplace experimentation, how you run experiments in these marketplaces so you can actually get numbers that make sense and you can trust in them. And to get started with all of this, I'm going to take a huge step back and I'm going to go to what's the definition of a marketplace. I know this is like basic, extreme basics, but I want to get everyone on the same page. So a marketplace, you have demand and supply. And then you have an optimization problem that we are talking about. So you have advertisers that could be represented as the demand. You have users that could be the supply side of things. And the optimization that we want to do, or what we want to achieve here, is to maximize an objective function, which could be conversions or exposure, some sort of goal that the advertiser wants to have. And we do this, let's say, and I'm going to deep dive much more into that, by understanding both sides of the marketplace. For example, in sponsored search, you have content and search users. And then you have, let's say, in all these different applications that Mike already discussed about, that you have sellers, buyers, content and people looking for those contents, or employers and job seekers in case of Indeed, and so on. So that's a huge space that is mostly what I'm going to be talking today. There's another huge space as well in this whole ad tech world, which are marketplace platforms. I'm not going to deep dive into any of that, but I wanted to mention that because it's also very important and very key component on all of this. The companies like Retail, PubMatic, even Amazon, Google, and many other companies, they do have a strong presence in marketplace platforms, but I'm not going to deep dive into that. Now, the advertiser, let's say, if we think about the goal, they want to sell something, for example. They want to try to reach as many buyers as possible. And let's say they have a willingness to pay for that. So they would like to pay for impressions, for clicks, for conversions. And on the other side of the marketplace equation, you have the users that probably, in this example, they maybe want to consume something. They want to buy something from a website, for example. This marketplace that is providing the connection between both. And that way, website needs to do the matching between sellers and buyers. Now, this website, which could be, for example, Google or many other companies, and they do have the role of optimizing the marketplace. And that is kind of like what I'm going to be talking about now. So going back to the example that Michael was kind of like referring to. So if you have a ranking, if you have a search problem, let's say if you have a use case where you have a search box and someone wants to buy a cooking book, for example, and now you have the task of ranking the results, hopefully as good as you can. So the first problem you have, it's what you should show to the user. And then the second part of that problem is like how you should rank the results of that search. Then you have a different problem that is also very important, that it's how you actually monetize that. So you want to search something as a user, and then as let's say this marketplace, they want to show the results, show a rank list of those results, but also they need to define how you're going to be monetizing this and how you're going to be charging the advertisers for that. So this combined problem, ranking higher the best matches or ranking higher advertisers that pay the most, it's a very important question that it's something that we're going to deep dive a little bit. And the key to find a solution to this is to understand basically two things, and then everything else kind of like follows, but it's very hard to work on these two things. One of them is the willingness to pay from employers. And the other one is how you capture the attention of the user, how you really deliver something that the user is really looking for. So I'm going to talk first about a potential solution. There are many, and this is one of them, a second price auction that Mike already referred to. I'm going to deep dive a little bit into the math here, but just to make the case on why we do this and how we need to build engineering to make this work. So extremely simplified, I'm going to skip a bunch of details here, but the willingness to pay can be described as a bid in an auction system. So you have an auction and you have, let's say, advertisers that comes to the auction and say how much they're willing to pay for an advertiser's, for a click, let's say, on that specific advertising. And then you have the user engagement that can be represented as the click-through rate, for example, on how they actually engage with the content that you're showing them. And this click-through rate can be represented by this probability of the job, let's say, I keep saying job, but the user actually clicking or interacting with an ad, given that they saw the ad, for example. We're going to call this BI as the bid and PI as the probability. So how much value you should expect from that impression can be represented as the basically this probability times this bid, which is basically saying the expected value for an impression in this case. And the second price auction says, okay, so we're just going to rank using this expected value, and that will give you, let's say, the order, the rank. But the monetization strategy comes when you say, I'm just going to charge to the nth rank ad the bid that comes right after that. So let's say the very first top, let's say, ad will just pay the second bid, and so on. So, okay, so we have a solution for the ranking and the monetization problem, but there are two major problems here. One of them is how we find the bid, and the second one is how we find the click-through rate. So basically how we estimate that probability function. And how to determine the bid, it's not trivial. Of course, you have one option is just to ask the advertiser. Of course, they may not even know what the bid should be, though they could have a lot of control to define the value, that bid, but it's very static. You cannot ask them like for every, let's say, incoming user to the website, every time you cannot ask them like, what's the bid for that specific user? And then auto bidding algorithms, it's much more dynamic. You can, let's say, try to estimate or try to define an optimization framework that will define what's the bid that you want to use. But the only problem is that it's a little bit disconnected from the advertiser. So how this works in general, it's represented in this diagram. This is just a copy paste from this paper that I highly recommend if anyone is interested on how these things have been built in different companies. And here you have, I'm going to go very quickly through this flow here, but you usually have to define, let's say, a function that's going to say, okay, so how much I'm far from the, let's say, the goal that I want to achieve as a bidding agent. So let's say you're a company that you want to, let's say, deliver as much value as you can to these users, and the user will give you, let's say, a budget. So you have a budget that you want to use, that you want to, let's say, optimize through, and you have a function that wants to approximate, hopefully to spend all of that budget and give as much value as you can for them. Now, you have this control system that will say, okay, so how far we are from achieving this goal, and you can define an error function, for example, and that error will say how you should be changing the bid over time. Now, on the other side of the problem, how to determine the click-through rate. This is also a dynamic system by nature. You have users that they change their behavior, they change the way that they engage with the website, and here again, there's a reference from a very interesting paper that actually shows an actual application for how to estimate this. I'm going to deep dive into really how this is built. It's like a long discussion in itself, but you have a feedback that you get from users. For example, you get, of course, the click-through rate, you get the clicks that they did, and then you have ways of estimating what could be the probability of, let's say, of that click happening for incoming data. You have historical data that you can use to fit these functions, And then you can build these machine learning models that can be used for, let's say, retrain and keep updating these models. So, okay, so we have the second price auction, we have a bid, we have a click-through rate, and okay, so we're good. And in reality, it's not true. So there's still many other problems that you need to work on, and you need to find, and you need to, let's say, try to find a solution. So for example, how to run experiments, and how to align the monetization strategy with the user objectives. And that's very complicated. How to help users to set up the right advertisement campaign at the very beginning. So how much they're gonna pay, how much budget they want to use, if it's a budget-based platform. All of those things are open questions and are really complicated that I'm not gonna cover all of them. I'm just gonna touch a little bit on the experimentation side of things. So let's say you have a function that you're feeding and you're using for your sponsorship that is a probability of click given scene. It could be anything, could be a different bidding algorithm, could be anything that you're using actively for, let's say, for this optimization problem that I presented before. And let's say you have a very common idea to just run an A/B test side by side. You have a model 1 that is what you had before, and now you have a treatment that is the new function that you just fed it. And you have this running for a long time. Let's say it's powered now, and you have a 10% improvement in stat sig between treatment and control. So you're super happy. You ramp up all of your ads and now using this new function, and you're super happy that everything's gonna work fine. So do we see the 10% improvement of the target metric for every ad? And this is a common misconception that I've seen in many cases, people doing this type of experimentation things on marketplaces. And the answer is unlikely. There's some problems here with the assumptions that you're taking on how you're running the experiment. So what's the main problem here is that you're basically having what is called spillover effects. You're contaminating, for example, the data you show, the ranking that you show to users. It's combining both treatment and control in the same results. So you don't have, let's say, the treatment completely isolated from control. And that combination, it's violating this assumption that is really what you should expect when you run an A/B test, that is the SUTVA, let's say that it's the stable unit testing value assumption. And I know it's like a mouthful of words there, but it's something very core to how experimentation actually is run, and something that you should be careful with if you run these type of experiments. So there are, of course, many teams across the industry working on these type of problems, because it's a real issue, because you don't know exactly what's the effect of your experiments on your new changes in the things that you're doing in production. So I just put here one reference to LinkedIn, and that they are actively publishing these type of solutions, and you should totally go and check that out. And the solution for this that they propose is that you should do a split budget testing. So you basically isolate the marketplace in different budgets, and you basically break down your marketplace, let's say, with one specific marketplace that will have only treatment applied, let's say, to that segment of the budget, and then another segment of the budget that is a completely isolated marketplace will have the control side of things. So this is something I wanted to mention. Now, final remarks, just to wrap up quickly here. There are no textbook solutions for any of this. Every marketplace is different, and all they have their own nuances and own problems. So it's very hard for anyone to just write a book that is like, here are all the recipes of success to how to build this. It's extremely nuanced to every company, how they need to work through this. Marketplaces are unique. Aligning monetization, the company's objectives, and the user objectives will create just like these very strange versions of different algorithms and bidding strategies and monetization strategies that are needed for keeping the marketplace optimized. The user behavior is very unique for these marketplaces and changes all the time. The willingness to pay, it's very hard to understand. Not even advertisers know it. So you need to approximate that in many ways. And every advertiser for every marketplace, they have a different, let's say, perspective of what they're looking for and what they really want to achieve from the marketplace. The running experiments, as I mentioned, it's not trivial. It's not just running an A/B test and you're good. It's a little bit more nuanced than that. And then setting up the right advertisement campaign, it's really hard. It's really, really hard. Like how you recommend budgets, how you define the pricing strategy, and what is the likelihood of success? What is the value? What is the, let's say, the contract that you give to advertisers on what they're going to get from the marketplace, and how you set the expectation is extremely complicated and very nuanced. So yeah, with that, I finished my presentation.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Gastón. First of all, I think we all completely agree. Marketplaces are all completely different, all very unique. But you do a really great job at making something that seems so complex to some people to be very, very simple, all the way from supply and demand to second price auctions and successful optimization. I'm sure we've all heard of Indeed being used as an example of ads done right. So it's really great to see someone from the team explaining how you guys are doing it. So thanks again. And now we'll cross over to a slightly different industry with Ben, the product manager at Thumbtack. Welcome.
All right. Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Molly. Thanks, everyone. Yeah, I'll just start presenting here. All right, so cool. So yeah, hopefully everybody can see that. Yeah, so I think, yeah, there's gonna be a little bit of a contrast with this one, both in that, you know, I'm a product manager, not an engineer. So this is like a bit more high level, although I think a lot of the stuff, you know, a lot of the in the weeds stuff that Gastón was talking about are things that are like underlying what we're doing. And I think the last point that was made by Gastón was really great, which is that, like, you know, all marketplaces and companies are really different. And so I'm going to basically get into like some of the unique challenges that we had here at Thumbtack. Yeah, so I'll just start by introducing Thumbtack, then talk about like, okay, what's the problem space we were trying to solve, and then what we've actually done and where we are now. So yeah, so what is Thumbtack? So it's a services marketplace. So our product focuses on the home categories. So like, you know, remodeling or like pest control, like sealing your driveway, like that kind of stuff, because that's where there's a lot of customer repeat. But we started with every service, and we still kind of support things like criminal defense attorneys and, you know, like mass tutoring and stuff like that. It's just not really our like product focus that we're building for. So yeah, so customers can come to Thumbtack, you find a pro and you get your job done. That's what we try to do on the customer side. And on the pro side of the marketplace, on the supply side, basically it's a marketing tool. So like you can grow your business without having to like put a lot of your own time into marketing. Like you sign up for Thumbtack and you set it up and then you get customers. So that's sort of the value prop on both sides of the marketplace. Now how this actually works. So it's somewhat of a search engine, but not really. So customers can like tell us what type of job they want and like where they are, and then you can search for pros, but we're not like a free text search engine. So it's kind of like what Mike was talking about earlier, more like navigating a taxonomy. And then customers see a list, they can contact and book pros. And then, you know, based on that communication, a job gets done. So I'll just show that visually what that looks like. So here's a pro list for, this is, let's say for deck staining in Oakland. So you can see, okay, we've got a few pros. You can talk to a pro and then message them. And then at that point, this is like actually a conversation I had with a plumber on Thumbtack. And then, yeah, one thing that's interesting is like, okay, so at that point, when the customer contacts the pro, that's our like charge point. So one interesting thing here is that like, we don't have organic results in a traditional sense. Like any pro that gets contacted, that pro pays for that contact. So it's like a down from the pro standpoint, it's like somewhat down funnel monetization point as compared to like something like a CPC ad, which is good from the pro's perspective, although it's not a job by any means, especially as the category gets more complex, the likelihood that it actually turns into a hire, like something like remodeling or something, gets much lower. That's just like the nature of these businesses. So yeah, and then how this monetization actually works is, as I said, so the pro gets charged for every customer that actually reaches out to them specifically. However, in some cases, multiple pros can get contacted because, like I said, not everyone turns into a job. So we kind of upsell customers on contacting multiple pros. The pricing we have is pretty complex. So basically it depends on the area and the type of the job. So for instance, somewhere like the Bay Area in New York City costs more for the same job than like Oklahoma. We also have, you can see this table here, we also have like, even within the same area, we have pricing that varies based on the type of job. So like a bigger house costs more. So it's like trying to get at like, okay, what's the underlying dollar value? Like obviously getting your 6-bedroom house clean costs a lot more than a 1-bedroom apartment. And our pricing tries to reflect that. And so we do have these, so these are fixed prices that like every pro would pay. And I'll get into that in a sec. So yeah, so we're trying to increase the monetization rate, the average price that's paid. That's like one of the things we're trying to do. Obviously, like the company has growth in other ways, like getting more searches. And also in low supply markets, we want to get more jobs done by just increasing supply, not necessarily raising monetization. But when you have the markets that are, you know, there's five or more pros that customers can choose from, that's where we want to like increase monetization rate. So there's 2 ways we can do that. We can just raise the prices on everyone. So right now, like any pro that gets contacted pays from a list, whereas the top ranking one or the bottom ranking one is going to pay the same price. Or we can allow market-driven pricing. So we're currently in this fixed price model, and I thought this little graph was useful that I took from another presentation. So like if you think of this as like a cumulative distribution of contact prices, so like a fixed price model is like, okay, it's just a vertical line, like 100% of them are at one price. Whereas if we go to a market, a variable pricing model, we can actually allow some prices, some to be priced below that, more to be priced above it, and then have it increase the average to the mean price, which would be like the dashed line there. So that's the hypothesis with changing our pricing model to market driven. So what have we tried? We've been sort of iterating on this for a little bit. So basically, you know, we know there's a lot of pricing headroom. So we're kind of parallel tracking both like raising the prices and then also experimenting with the market-based pricing. So we've done a couple of versions. So the first thing we tried was basically a traditional kind of sponsored listing thing where we said, okay, like you can buy the first slot in the search results and you'll get a sponsor tag on there. And the pros just bid using a multiplier. Again, that's because of the underlying complex pricing, and we didn't want to like add like another like ad fee like on top of that. We thought that'd be more confusing than just increasing the price you pay. And we had a 1.5x minimum there because that's sort of like what we on average would account for the loss of conversion from up-ranking a lower quality pro. And that worked okay. And then the second version that we tried was, I'll get into the learning. Second version that we tried was no fixed ad slots. So like you could have unlimited bidders in the auction and they would just like move up dynamically based on how much they bid. And we lowered the minimum a lot, kind of similar UX. We also provided like estimates and more of an emphasis on like boosting search result ranking. So the learnings from those versions. So one is like to really achieve the revenue, like a substantial revenue gain, like we needed auction pressure in like all of the like markets that had a lot of, that were high supply. But to actually get that auction pressure, like you really need like a lot of adoption because you need like the market's so fragmented, as I mentioned earlier. So you need like 3+ pros in every single market that has like more than X. And it's just really hard to do that when it's like an optional feature. So like we would have had to like go and like market this like really, really hard to get really substantial revenue impact as compared to just increasing prices, which felt like wasn't a great trade-off. And then also like just the sponsored listing format generated a lot of like negative sentiment among pros. They just kind of viewed it really negatively. It's like, oh, my like quality doesn't matter. Someone can just buy this top slot. It's yeah. And then the value prop was a little unclear. So like the multiplier thing, people were scared about like, what am I actually paying? They were reluctant to bid higher without like an indication of what concretely, like what you would get in return for that. So I'll just get into what we're doing now is actually testing now is a version of this that's tries to solve a bunch of those problems. So first thing is just like integrated into the core flow of the app. Like we're basically saying, okay, like everyone, this is just something you need to do when you set up Thumbtack, is to set your prices, is to bid basically. And we switched it to dollar-based bidding instead of a multiplier. So like basically you can just drag the slider and you can see these prices change in the table, and that's like their maximum prices. We'd like to do an auto bidder at some point, but like as was mentioned in the previous presentation, the complexity of doing that is a little challenging, especially without having the conversion data to like ensure quality. And then we provide guidance on like the lead estimates. We give an indication of like the relative competitive status. And then the positioning, I think, is really important. Like it's not like it's more just positioned as like, hey, this is how you control your prices and how much volume you get. And we don't, instead with this task, like instead of individually labeling like this result is sponsored, it's just a thing at the top that says like, hey, like how much pros are willing to pay as part of ranking, in addition to other stuff. Yeah, and so we're testing this. This is going pretty well. So yeah, that's hopefully, yeah, finish there with enough time for the Q&A section.
Oh, absolutely. Ben, thank you so much. It's super interesting to hear from you and see such a zoomed in approach to ad monetization at Thumbtack. Really interesting to see like how you guys have learned and then started to change things, like building bidding into the core flow and sort of how it came to be at Thumbtack. So I have already a couple of questions, but now we'll open the floor. If anyone has any questions that they've thought of throughout the presentation, more than happy for you guys to turn on your microphones and voice it out. And if not, you can write it in the chat. I also have a few that have been sent in. Okay, perfect. So someone had their hand up. Steve, your question?
So my question is for Ben. Can you think of ways that you could incentivize both the end users and the pros to give that conversion data?
Yeah, there's a lot of ways. And it's not true that we don't have any. Like we actually have pretty good coverage. It's just not enough to build like a conversion optimizing system on yet. But we're trying to shift towards confirmed bookings. Is like the fundamental product change that's happening. And so that's just going at like a certain pace. And when that gets to a certain critical mass, then I think we'll have enough conversion data.
Cool. Yeah, I was trying to think of something like Airbnb, you know, where the agreement is sort of made external to the service, but not really, it's made through the service. So, you know, if it's required that you take part in the agreement of the service or not.
Yeah, I think the challenge is just for some so for like services like TV mounting, you can actually like book a pro on Thumbtack, and then we obviously know if that happened. But you know, for something like building a fence or something, it's like somebody has to come out and maybe you book that, and then it's, you know, you might have 3 people come out, and so it's just a lot of friction in actually getting the conversion. But we're working on solving that.
Michael, I have here a question for you from the audience. How will sponsored listings be impacted in the post-cookie world?
So I briefly touched on that in my presentation. I think they will explode even more, because once cookies are dead, which, you know, will probably happen in the next couple of years unless Google changes its mind, then the demographic type targeting and behavioral type targeting, where, you know, you search for shoes and then those shoes, you know, follow you all over the internet, will no longer be feasible. And so the sellers of those shoes will need to find other ways to find me. And the best way to find me is places where I'm actually searching for shoes, and that is sponsored listings. So and you know, to implement sponsored listings, we don't need cookies. So it's definitely not third-party cookies. And so yeah, I think that's going to be a really positive thing for sponsored listings.
Thank you. Any more questions from anyone here? Amber, question from you.
Yes. Maybe what are some of the challenges that each of you faced when launching sponsored listings on your sites?
I can take a first step to that answer. So one of the main challenges that it's often overlooked, it's how really, let's say, the users react to sponsored listings. The actual employers, let's say in our case, the advertisers, having some sort of communication channel that they can understand really what's going on and they can trust really what you're doing is something that is key for this to work. And so they trust in the value that you're asking them to give you. And then after you have, let's say, budgets or whatever pricing strategy you have and you optimize it, let's say, in these black boxes, that's kind of like the easy part, I would say, quote unquote. The hard part is to just get the trust of employees, like in our cases, employers to come in and actually use our website. And I would say that's kind of like one of the main things.
Yeah, I would agree. I mentioned that in my presentation, but yeah, just especially users that have been on the platform for a long time have a conception of how it works. And so like introducing this new thing, that, especially if it basically allows someone who is currently a lower quality pro to be ranked higher, is something that you need to be pretty careful about how that gets messaged and communicated.
Yeah, I'll echo that as well. I think the challenges kind of changed over time also as the industry is learning. Like in the beginning, one of the challenges was a lot of the ads were irrelevant, but we'll learn, and so users, the customers of the websites would be annoyed, but the industry learned to deal with that with quality scores. And so now the bigger challenge, I agree, is educating advertisers in a scalable and efficient way.
Dimitri, question from you.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to follow up on the same topic. In terms of, Michael said educating advertisers, but advertising can sometimes be a trap for advertisers. So if you have, 10 people and they're like the top guys, and if they don't bid for advertising, you know who the top 10 guys are. But if they start bidding, right, it's the same top 10 guys, but now they're worse off strictly. So how do you guys think about actually advertising creating value for the advertisers? Because it's not always clear what the value proposition is for them.
Let me take this and then Gastón and Ben can chime in. So the world is very dynamic, right? So if I think about, think about both the applications of Gastón and Ben. So on job search, it's not like there's always the best software engineering job out there, right? So if we urgently need to hire a database developer, right, we will promote on Indeed.com for the next 2 weeks, and then 4 weeks after that, someone else would be the top results. Similarly, if you're a pro and you have a slow time period right now, you're particularly incentivized to to promote. And when you already have tons of bookings, you may say, I have enough, I'll stop advertising. Similarly with manufacturers, right? You have a new variety of Coke coming out, and so now they really want to advertise on Instacart. And then when they don't, then Pepsi may want to promote something of theirs. So I think there is a lot of value generated from this. You have periods when you're particularly interested in promoting yourself.
Yeah, also one thing I probably could add there is that one interesting thing about the auction in some cases is that you really level things. So let's say the bid could be very high. Let's say you have an Amazon that comes and they want to just put a bunch of money to hire something. But if they're only, let's say, that are very high bids, let's say, and then you have others that are not really that high, then the second price auction will self-allocate, let's say, and will actually show a good combination between people, let's say, that it's advertising something that may not be spending the same that you're doing. And that's something that I think we're actively seeing, let's say, in some of the applications we do at Indeed.
Yeah, and then one other point I think we've seen in Thumbtack that's kind of interesting is not necessarily on the advertiser value side, but more, kind of both. On like our quality score is based a lot on like reviews and stuff like that, so it tends to heavily weight towards like established pros on the platform. So often we think there's like real quality signals that aren't captured in that score that actually are captured in a pro that can afford to bid higher often is more efficient at actually closing jobs, which is good for the customer as well. So that kind of like hidden signals that you can't really observe just from quality metrics is also creating value.
Thank you very much.
No, very interesting. Amber, another question from you.
Yes, I have a question for Gastón. Could you speak to some of the challenges about building the engineering for sponsored listings?
Yeah, I can certainly do. It's a big task and it has many complexities there. I would say you can break it down probably in more than 3 parts, but 3 big parts, and all of them have their own complexities. One of them, it's, let's say, how you really understand the platform that you need to build, how connect things together, let's say, how to maintain things flowing from the, let's say, from the UI, from the employer side of things, all the way into your system. So capturing all this data you need to use for optimizing is one layer that is very complicated and a lot of work. The second layer, I would say, it's, let's say, the algorithms around this. Let's say all the machine learning and the control systems and all these, let's say, black boxes that will optimize for finding the right bid, for adjusting for the right value, for the right, let's say, matching that you have. All of those different things in itself, they have deeper layers of complexity, but that's, I would say, the second layer. And the third one, I would say, it's how you support all of this with experimentation, how you really provide the notion of, are we doing the right job? Are we tracking the right metrics? And do we have enough signals that we're doing exactly what we were expecting to do? So building a platform that can control for capturing the data you need to have, keeping track of metrics, and allow the teams to keep improving things and running experiments, it's also super important. It's a lot of things, and it's very complicated.
And I just want to add, I want to be cognizant of time, but just to add briefly, building a well-functioning system is indeed sort of incredibly difficult, and that's sort of a big part of the inspiration behind Topsort, to do this really hard job once, do it well, and then make it much easier for subsequent platforms to deploy it, in a much faster and much easier way by leveraging our work.
Absolutely. I mean, thank you, Michael. I think you concluded it quite nicely there. Sponsored listings is always a journey, seeing, like how it works, building on what you learned in the past. But definitely something very prominent, I think, moving forward in the e-commerce and marketplace industry. So thanks again to our panelists, Michael, Gastón, and Ben. Really, really great to hear your thoughts, opinions, and journeys with sponsored listings. And a big thank you to all the attendees here today. It's great to see some new faces, some familiar faces. And please do stay tuned for future Topsort webinars. Would love to hear some more thoughts on sponsored listings and ad monetization moving forward.